Panels,
What is
with
the
the shared
feminist
history
movement?
of
It is
South
the
Korea and
movement of
Japan,
social
South
and
Korean
political
government should
campaigns
rather
that have the
actively
goal to achieve
facilitate the
gender equality and
remilitarization
end
of Japan
sexism.
in order to
So what
counter
do
and cater
feminists
to
want
the
to
negatives
promote?
and
They
harms
do not
posed by
want to
countries
promote
like China
themselves to
and
be
North
better
Korea.
than men,
How
right?
to
What
propose,
they
right?
want to
What is
do
the setup
is
on OG? We will be extremely
have
clear here.
equity and a
Firstly,
healthy
what is
relationship between the two
remilitarization, right?
genders
So
and dynamics.
remilitarization is
So
basically the
what is
process by
feminism
which a
about?
country
Feminism isn't
reestablishes
about
or
women's rights
basically
alone, right?
enhances
It's
their
about
military capabilities
equality,
and
and we would
defense
like to
posture, which
stress
obviously
this.
follow
So
things
in
like
the end, the
like
feminist movements
pacifism or
want to reach
limited military
attention in
engagement,
order
right?
to reach
This
women's
basically
rights
involves
and in
increasing
order
things
to,
like
at the end
military
of the
spending,
day, change
expanding
and
the armed
achieve
forces, or
equality.
developing
So
things like
by
new weapons and
promoting positive
technologies, and
masculinity on our
revising these
side, all
defense
of these
policies
goals
to
can be
allow for
reached.
more proactive
So
military roles,
moving on
such
to
as
our problem
collective
analysis,
defense or like
judge the goal
intervention
of the
in
feminist
regional
movement
conflicts, where
itself is to
actually we
not only gain
like
attention.
there would be
Even
a
if you gain
strengthened
attention,
like
bad
military
attention is no
like
use
under our
because
side. And let's give an
alienating
exclusive
other
context in
people
this
who are
debate about
not part of
Japan,
the
right?
movement
Note that
would only garner more
remilitarization marks
hatred
a
for the
significant
movement,
shift
even when
from its
feminists
like
are met with
post World War II
enough
pacifist stance,
oppression
which
and
is
hatred
driven by
already.
rising
Hence,
security
we
threats
believe that
from like
gaining
a
a
lot of
solid
neighboring
following
countries
base
and a
is the
desire to
most
actually
important
strengthen
part.
these types
The
of
problem of the
alliances,
status quo is
particularly
that women
with
are
countries like
thought
the
of
United
to be
States and
radical,
other
hence
regional
most men
partners, right?
oppose them.
So
Men
in
think
this
that they're
debate,
being
then, it's really
alienated
crucial and
because of their
important to
personal
understand
ideas,
that
because
Japan's
their personal ideas of
remilitarization represents this
masculinity
major
are
change
being
from
opposed
its
and
post
shunned.
World War
But by
II
continuing to
committed to things like
outcast
pacifism,
specific
which
ideas and gender
emphasize
roles,
avoiding
men will
military conflict,
continue to
right?
believe
So
that the
basically, this
feminist
shift
movement
is
is
largely
against
driven
them
by
and they
increasing
should
security
oppose
threats.
them.
Again, we tell you
Like
from countries
also, but
also
on our side,
like from North
by
Korea,
encouraging a
Point.
specific
missile
idea
and
rather
nuclear
than
programs
pushing
and
the other
China's
away,
growing
we
military
can promote
assertiveness,
gender
right? Whereas these
equity
trends
and further expand the feminist
intensifies,
narrative.
like at the end of the day,
So
the
moving
military
on to our first
capabilities and
argument,
spending to actually
we
better
think that
protect itself is
by
something crucial
promoting
and
gender
necessary in the first place.
equity, we
Because
can
Japan also
abolish
seeks to
gender roles,
strengthen things
but
like
in a
its alliances
positive
with the
way.
United
So
States and other
alienating
regional
men who
partners, which
strongly
actually aims
identify
for a
with
more active role
instead
in
of
regional security
alienating
efforts.
men
This
who
is
strongly
the main
identify
like
with
goal of Japan in the first
masculinity, we
place,
can
right? So we
support
tell you that
positive
there is this urgency to actually
masculinity,
strengthen the
and this
military
allows
at
the
the end of the day.
feminist
But
movement
then
to encourage
secondly,
healthier
what does it mean to facilitate
masculinity, leading to
remilitarization
gender
under our
equity.
side? This
So
relates to our model
reframing
where our side
masculinity to
supports the
focus
active
on qualities like
remilitarization of Japan,
empathy,
right? So it
respect, and
basically means like
emotional
they would be giving
vulnerability
support
promotes
by contributing to
equity
things like
without
supplies or
outright
actually
challenging
giving them the
all gender
resources to do
differences
so,
and
right? So there
distinctions.
would be this
So how
active
does this
support and
happen?
we
A,
actually
we
would
can
enable a
reduce
country like
toxic
Japan to
masculinity.
strengthen its
So
military
toxic
capabilities and its
masculinity can
defense
often be
posture,
formed
which
when
it could actually
men think that women are thinking
look like
less of
various
them or think
actions,
that they are
like
better
providing
than each other,
diplomatic
right?
backing for increased military
So
spending
when
and
we
having the
abolish
joint
gender roles,
military exercises and encouraging things like
women
collaborative
and
defense
men are
agreements with their
essentially
allies, right? So it
like
also may look
become
like, for
against each
example,
other because
sharing
they
their
want to
technology and
abolish
resources,
certain
their
roles that
intelligence,
men
which
think
actually advocates for these
are like
legislative changes
supposed to
that
be there,
allow for
right?
a more
But
proactive
when we
military
promote
role,
like
right?
positive
So,
masculinity,
what
we
is
are
our path
not
to victory
like
then in this debate?
pushing
It's
one
two things, right?
gender
Point.
down, but
We
instead
should tell you that
uplifting the other
remilitarization
idea
is
up, right?
necessary for a stable,
So by supporting
for like regional
positive
like stability
masculinity,
and
feminism encourages
at
men
the end
to
of the day,
embrace
so
healthier
like
traits,
neighboring
right?
countries like
So what
China
is
would
the
not
impact
get
of
their territory and
this?
etc. And
So
both
we'll
Japan
have
and South
healthier
Korea stand to
relationships
gain
and
regional
more
stability,
respect in
especially
general, right?
China's assertive
Supporting positive
territorial claims
masculinity
and military
in the
expansion,
end
like
is
expansion in
promoting
the Asia Pacific region. So in and
positivity
of
in
itself,
general.
we
This
tell you
will
that
involve
Japan and South
actively
Korea has some
redefining what
sort of
it means to
shared
be a
history
man
and
in
shared interests and goals in the
contemporary
first place,
society
right?
as well.
So
And this
we
can be
already
achieved
and,
through
and a
education
quick
programs,
characterization of the status
community
quo is that
workshops,
there
and
is
media
already
campaigns
existing
that
trilateral
specifically
partnerships
highlight
with the
traits
United
such as
States.
empathy,
There is
respect, and
already an
emotional
existing
intelligence.
motivation
So
for
by
Korea to be
promoting
engaged
these
in
values,
Japan's
the
remilitarization. So
feminist
we think that
movement can create
Korea
spaces
also
where
gains
the men
technology and
also feel
intelligence from
comfortable
this, which
expressing
means
their
it's actually a
emotions
win-win
and
solution
engaging in
at the end of the
healthy,
day, right?
respectful
And let's be
relationships
very
in
clear
general.
about the line
So
we
with
draw
that, we
here.
would
I
also
think that
like to
it's
tell you
not
that
within
men
our
who are
burden to
encouraged to
defend
adopt
like Korea
positive
encouraging
masculine
Japan to
traits
provoke
can
other
also lead to
like
healthier
nations and
dynamics
start
in
regional
relationship
conflicts,
with
but
people
rather
in
we think
general.
that the goal of
By
remilitarization
fostering a
is rather to
culture where
promote
positive
national security
masculinity
and to
is
strengthen
celebrated more,
existing
the feminist
allyships, right?
movement can
So
not
yeah,
only
moving on to
improve
the arguments then,
individual
firstly, Why
No,
this?
I-
They can also
I'll take you
contribute
later
to a
with South
bigger
Korean
social
government's
shift
interest in the
towards
first
more
place,
equitable
which is obviously the
partnerships.
burden
This
of proof in this debate in
inclusivity
order
can
to take
attract
the
a
debate, right?
broader base
So
of
quick
supporters,
context, what are the
including
interests of
men,
South
who
Korean
often
government? It
feel
is simply
alienated
twofold.
by
Firstly,
traditional
able
feminist
to,
narratives.
to be able
So
to cater
what
and
we're
fight
saying
against
is
North
that
Korea and other
by
neighboring countries that may actually pose
by
threats to them. But then secondly,
encouraging
having that
one
regional and national stability,
positive
which
idea
means they
over
would actually have things like
pushing
better
away
security
another, we
for
are
their
able
territory
to
and etc.
have
Moving on to
better
the first analysis about regional
relationships,
security.
better
Know that both
personal
South Korea and
relationships,
Japan face
and
a lot of
also
significant threats, again,
move
from
to
North Korea,
contribute to a
especially with
bigger
its like
societal
advanced
shift.
nuclear
So
weapons
moving
and
on to our
missile
second
capabilities.
argument.
This is to say that
So we
exactly
think
because
that
they're allies, they
promoting
have the same and
positive
mutual threats and
masculinity
like
will
goals
further
and
expand
ideologies.
the
So
feminist
the moment
narrative.
you actually
Judge,
support Japan's militarization, South Korea will have a better and coordinated defense strategy to actually counter these shared threats. Because when two countries emerges, they're more likely going to counter the negative threats from opposing countries effectively and better. As the saying goes, when there are more people interfering or groups interfering, it will be a stronger, in a sense that like teamwork actually exists at the end of the day. So under this argument, why is it then important to have remilitarization and facilitate it given the current situation? Because firstly, given the threats from North Korea, there is an urgency to simply enhance their defense systems, right? We need to create that strong base and foundation. And in terms of like the US here, we tell you that as the US shifts its focus towards like things like greater power competition, having remilitarization in Japan would actually support the US strategic objectives, which simply leads to like a strengthened connection and strengthened like relation between US and like Japan and North Korea, and South Korea. Where at the end of the day, we tell you that it would contribute to collective defense efforts and enhance that military interoperability and actually participate in joint operations. Because Judge, we tell you that US and Japan, US, Japan, and North Korea are crucial pillars for regional security in East Asia, which means that under our side, we strengthen the connection and diplomacy between US, South Korea, and Japan, which allows them to actually have stability in the Asia-Pacific region. But before moving on, I'll take that PR.
Yeah, Japan and South Korea have had really bad historical tensions. Specifically, Japan has launched wars on South Korea. How do you think the South Koreans would react if they supported this? If the government
supported this? Right? I'll literally engage that after this. But then we already told you that at the end of the day, Japan and Korea has a shared history, which means they have these mutual threats and like mutual they have similar goals in the first place, which means they would be able to actually create that stronger foundation to actually like cater to the threats given by neighboring countries, right? But then third analysis then about international peacekeeping and cooperation responsibility. We tell you that supporting remilitarization policies actually positions South Korea as a responsible leader in international peacekeeping and operation, right? Because the moment you enhance their military capabilities, South Korea would actively contribute to things like regional security and stability, right? You would reinforce its commitment to multilateral efforts in addressing common challenges such as things like humanitarian crises or terrorism in general. So this approach basically not only strengthens the partnerships with their allies, but also enables South Korea to participate meaningfully in the international peacekeeping missions, which showcases its willingness to actually uphold its global peace and security, which means that you actually further enhance the cooperation responsibility, in the first place. Because the moment you shoulder its share of defense responsibilities, South Korea would actually enhance its reputation on the world stage, fostering trust and collaboration with other nations, which is obviously crucial in the first place. With all those reasons that I'm incredibly proud to propose. Panels, when you live under proposition side, you disregard the root cause of gender inequality, why it persists, why it actually persists and exists in society in the first place. The idea of positive masculinity serves as an easy way out without actually achieving that true equality we're seeking for in the get-go. We tell you that positive masculinity just cements men's actions like being breadwinners as something moral in society, where without people being conscious about it, there is still gender inequality to an extent. This means that even if under side proposition, if they celebrate these quote-unquote positive traits in men, society still continues to actually place certain expectations on them based solely on their gender, which basically limits true equality. Judge, we tell you that any sort of labeling or redefining is still a form of inequality. Proud to oppose, right? Firstly, let me rebut their claim about the idea of toxic masculinity, right? Note that at the end of the day, toxic masculinity translates from gender roles, right? Why is this? Because toxic masculinity stems from things like societal pressures that pushes men to conform to harmful ideals of strength, stoicism, and dominance, right? It's basically the ideals born from restrictive gender roles. So the idea that they address toxic masculinity, the moment they just redefine what masculinity is under their side, and it's simply not true because they don't dismantle these root causes, which are gender roles in the first place, right? We tell you that gender roles and addressing toxic masculinity is somewhat interconnected because toxic masculinity is derived from gender roles in the first place. So the moment you abolish gender roles under our side altogether, we actually eliminate the expectations that lead to things like toxic behaviors, which actually fosters a more inclusive environment at the end of the day, right? I'll be further expanding this on my positive case later on. But just before I move on to my arguments, I would like to actually characterize what does the word look like on our side, right? Firstly, what is positive masculinity, right? So it's simply an approach to masculinity that encourages men to embrace qualities that are deemed positive, such as things like empathy, emotional openness, responsibility, and self-control, while actually rejecting harmful behaviors associated with toxic masculinity, things like aggression and dominance, right? But then secondly, under our side, we push for the idea of abolishing gender roles to a larger degree. How does it look like, right? Firstly, we would still include and support men who followed the feminist movement, but push them to remove all ideas of gender roles to begin with. And this goes far beyond positive masculinity. This looks like, for example, pushing for the narrative of having a diverse family roles, not just things like equal, not just things like unequal parenting, right? So let's say the idea that men are seen as breadwinners in the family, we would simply eradicate that narrative where women can also be breadwinners in the family, and men can actually, let's say, be seen as emotional supporters or like caregivers of the family. They can be the ones who do things like cooks food for their children or actually emotionally support their children. As again, we tell you that there is labeling in society of what men and women do. We would not have that under our side the moment we abolish these gender roles. But then thirdly, how do we actually abolish these gender roles in the first place? We would basically have a narrative that pushes towards the idea of that positive masculinity is far than enough. Where under our side, feminist movements would rather advocate more and focus more towards the idea of abolishing these gender roles through things like campaigning and etc. So the delta on side proposition is, even though masculinity exists, man would still have that push in society to be things like breadwinners or individuals who should protect women and etc. So in any way, under side proposition, men would still dominate over women to some extent. It is still rooted in the idea of masculinity and gender inequality because they still have the quote unquote gender roles to execute and uphold. So what is the simple difference here? It's just that under their side, they deem it as a good thing, even though it is actually just an extension of patriarchy. But under our side, we don't push for positive masculinity because of the the minimal benefits that rather exist in the first place. We rather push for true equality under our side. Our stance then is clear. We would we think that abolishing gender roles is something important, but we would do this step by step because again, the goal of feminist movement is to garner and achieve equality. And a major preemption here that we acknowledge that most people wouldn't be hardcore feminists and they would likely have other priorities in life. So we'll not prove that gender roles are the more pertinent issues to address and should weigh over anything OG argues, right? Moving on to the first positive case then about how this is actually in line with the principles of feminist movement. First, a quick context, right? What are the principles of feminist movements? Threefolds. Firstly, to achieve not just better, but equal rights for women in all areas. Secondly, they push towards women empowerment, where again, there should not be any clear gap between men and women. And thirdly, obviously the idea of gender equality, right? They want to women to be perceived as quote unquote similar to to men, right? The thesis under this argument then is simple. We tell you that the most feasible and viable way is to directly cater to gender roles. It is what perpetuates inequality in the first place when women or men are expected to do certain things, and it tends to be that men are doing the more dominant jobs and things, while women are seen as mere caregivers. The only way to address inequality in society, we tell you, is actually abolishing these gender roles. I have three layers of reasonings, right? Firstly, in order for our points to fly, we have to literally prove to you why gender roles are the root of inequality. And note that this is a crucial counter principle to proposition, right? Note that at the end of the day, gender roles are the root of inequality because they create a rigid framework that dictates how individuals should actually behave. It basically limits their scope and opportunities and reinforces that things like power imbalances, right? How does it look like? If a man, for example, is emotional supporters of the family, it would be seen as unethical on side proposition as they're not aligning with their quote unquote job of being the breadwinners. This is to say that you force women and men to act in a certain way where women should be caregivers and men should be breadwinners. This is to say that gender role actually perpetuates an uneven distribution of things like power and resources, where we tell you in areas like career opportunities, men would be more dominant than women are. They're seen as more capable, while women are often relegated to unpaid or undervalued roles. So at the end of the day, we tell you that to address any type of inequality, root causes of inequality in and of itself should be addressed. We cannot just cement or simply think that, oh, okay, we would redefine masculinity in order to actually achieve equality. Because again, it all basically comes from gender roles being like prominent in society. So at the end of the day, under our side, with these like abolishment of these like gender roles, we actually directly address these like imbalances by removing these arbitrary interests and limitations, allowing everyone, regardless of their gender, to pursue their interests, their shared responsibility, and have equal access to opportunities. Right. At the end of the day, redefining it is it's just simply making basically making the efforts of these feminist movements stagnant and the same. You won't literally create any true equality, because we have proven to you then why gender roles are rather the root causes of gender inequality. This just means that if you just push for positive masculinity, you just cement these gender roles as something moral and ethical in society. You just find a loop way out without actually addressing it in the first place. The impact here is simple. You don't achieve true equality. It goes against the whole main purpose and principle of feminist movement. And at the end of the day, labeling is a form of inequality under our proposition. If you emphasize positive masculinity, it implies that certain traits such as empathy or nurturing are novel when exhibited by men, while these same qualities are seen as default expectations for women. This rather reinforces a gendered perspective that limits women to nurture and caring roles, while labeling men's effort in these areas as exceptional. In any way, you still advocate for the idea of inequality. With all those reasons, then, I'm incredibly proud to oppose.
Judge, we say that the other side fails this case, right? They not only fail to provide proper insight on how men are the problem, when we all know that toxic masculinity comes from being unheard, right? Now, the other side neglects the actual underlying issue behind this point, hence we prevail. Now, moving directly onto the rebuttals against side opposition. Now, opposition side has one main point, that masculinity and like the gender role should be abolished as a whole. However, like they claim that eliminating gender roles is a more effective approach than promoting positive masculinity, right? Multiple layers of rebuttals to this. First of all, while the elimination of gender roles as a whole aims to create a more egalitarian society, it often severely overlooks the nuanced realities of how individuals are experienced genders, right? Simply abolishing gender roles may not actually address the underlying real issues of toxic masculinity, which can persist in a role-free environment as well, right? Now, without promoting positive masculinity, the other side risks leaving behind a world where harmful behaviors continue to thrive absolutely unchecked. Now, we would also like to tell you that in terms of practical outcomes, focusing on positive masculinity also yields much more practical outcomes in terms of reducing gender-based violence and promoting mental health amongst both genders. Now, programs that teach about healthy expressions of masculinity can lead to tangible benefits, such as lower rates of abuse, improved mental health for both parties, and better relationships. These outcomes that are exclusive on our side are crucial for fostering a safe and equitable society, which may not be achieved merely through the elimination of gender roles, which is not feasible in the first place. I will take that POI.
Yeah, toxic masculinity, like making men hide their emotions, is derived from the gender roles that men should not be the ones who are emotional. How do you literally achieve equality when you don't address the root issues of toxic masculinity in the first place? Please.
Okay, so we believe that there are many more causes, especially in modern day society, than gender roles, right? We first of all tell you that gender roles, like even if they are commonly abolishing, there's always a mark that is left. Hence, getting rid of this gender role is not going to do anything at all if the females keep on like complaining about the men, right? So like this also, my next rebuttal is also going to like refute to that, but also on cultural resonance, the concept of positive masculinity can easily resonate more deeply within communities that are traditionally steeped in certain masculine ideals, right? Rather than asking men to abandon their whole identities that they're already so accustomed to, because it is completely impossible, it invites them to rather reframe their understanding of what it means to be a man. This leads to a greater buy-in from the men who feel much alienated by the idea of erasing their gender roles entirely, which the other side wants to propose, right? Now, we say that encouraging a redefinition of masculinity, like rather than following side opposition's case, allows for a more inclusive dialogue that respects individuals' identities while also promoting healthy relationships as well as equality as a whole. Now, with that, we would like to move on to our third and last argument from side government, right? Now, we say that we better encourage male advocacy for gender equality. Judge, promoting positive masculinity encourages men to become proactive advocates for gender equality rather than sole passive observers. This can be facilitated through mentorship programs, community initiatives, and more educational campaigns that better highlight male role models who actively support these feminist causes, right? For example, workshops can be designed to educate men on their way their privilege can be leveraged to challenge systemic inequalities and support put both sides right. Moreover, integrating discussions about healthy masculinity into different fields and environments for these young boys can help future generations also understand the potential impacts on societal norms from a young age, right? So in terms of the comparative of a long-term solution, we prevail. Now, by framing advocacy as an essential aspect of positive masculinity, the feminist movement can better transform how men perceive their role in gender equality. Men who engage in advocacy not only help amplify feminist voices, but also challenge the status quo amongst their peers and surrounding neighbors. This is crucial because men often hold influential positions in various sectors, from politics to business, and their endorsement of feminist principles can lead to a much more significant policy change and cultural shifts. Furthermore, when men are vocal about their support for gender equality, it can create a ripple effect, encouraging other men around them to also examine their attitudes and behavior, thereby fostering a more supportive environment for women, which the other side once again cannot reach. So now what do we tell you, right? As more men step into advocacy roles, we also like to stress that the feminist movement gains valuable allies who can engage other men in meaningful conversations about gender equality. Male advocates can challenge harmful stereotypes and behaviors in their social circles, promoting a culture of respect and understanding. This active participation not only enhances the credibility of the feminist movement in general, but it also helps normalize discussions around gender roles and equality amongst men, reducing resistance to feminist ideals, which once again has better impacts than the other side's case, right? The result is a more robust, united front in addressing gender-based issues and ideas, as male advocates can better help bridge divisions and facilitate dialogue between genders. Moreover, this increased male involvement can actually lead to substantial societal changes, as advocacy efforts also can drive policies that promote gender equality in workplaces, educational institutions, and so much more. Now, by positioning men as allies in the fight for gender equality, the movement can not only improve outcomes for women, but also redefine masculinity in a way that benefits all individuals. Once again, this is exclusive because the other side wants to just abolish things, right? Now, ultimately, this approach attracts diverse supporters who see this value in collaborative efforts toward a more equitable society. And I will take that POI.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, do you think that gender roles perpetuates gender inequality on your side? Please engage.
No, we do not believe that gender roles perpetuate whatever inequality you think there is, right? We believe that the issue itself is not the fact that there were roles set for people. We have seen relationships and like in real life, there were many people who still follow this gender role, whatever it is, and they're still healthy because do you know what the problem at the end of the day is? It's because if you have a gender role, it is common that people actually partake in like toxic masculinity, but we believe that just because you have gender roles, it does not directly equate to like an increase in like toxic masculinity. A correlation and causation judge should never be like used as an interchangeable term like the other side uses it as, right? Now, so we would like to tell you that in summary of our case, by encouraging male advocacy for gender equality through the lens of more positive masculinity, we tell you that the feminist movement can achieve so much more. On our side exclusively, we told you like how the feminist movements can build a rather more powerful coalition of supporters dedicated to rather challenging gender norms and advancing equality for everyone, right? So for these reasons, we have never been more proud to propose. Thank you.
Judge, sorry. No matter how proposition tries to frame this benevolently, we tell you that positive masculinity still falls short. We tell you that without the force and the assertiveness of our side's feminist movement, we'd say that patriarchy is still going to prevail in the long run, and if there is any change, it'll be very ineffective. By the fact that they admitted through our POI that they don't think gender roles lead to inequality, we want to ask them then, why are the most patriarchal societies those in which gender roles are the most entrenched, those in which men still want women to be the caretakers and to stay at home and to follow these gender roles? We think this is like a logical fallacy. We tell you that the only way that the feminist movement can achieve gender parity is through deconstruction of gender roles. It does not have to be immediate, it does not have to be extreme and alienate men, as we'll show you later. But the crucial thing here is that women must not settle for less. They must not accept what men want to do, as they have been coerced into doing time and time again. We never told you that women on our side are going to hate men and are going to shun them if they don't want to shirk their gender roles and like abolish these gender roles immediately. We accept the fact that these gender roles still exist, and of course it's going to be difficult to like throw them off and like live in a way that doesn't need gender roles at all. We say that rather than trying to circumvent these, as side proposition is going to do, our side is going to be bold. We're going to take a strong stance and tell you that the feminist movement's interest is to completely eliminate this problem. And of course, to get to this point, we still need to involve men, and we're still going to do so on our side. We think that OG cannot win with their unclear case and their one-liner assertions. We think they don't take the root causes of gender inequality into account. And even if they do that, we're going to prove to you why our side is far more effective. So 3 things to expect from my speech, having said that. Firstly, a contention about the feminist movement's interests. And secondly, an intangible materialization of both types of feminism on either side. Then I'll be bringing my own positive case and some substantive. So firstly, on the issue of like the principles of the interests of the feminist movement, they told you that men are going to feel attacked and vulnerable because of the feminist movement on our side. But this is inexclusive. See here that both sides face the same problem. We think both sides are going to have to change and talk to have discourse with men who still cling on to toxic masculinity. But what are the 2 problems that you're going to get only on side proposition? Firstly, we're going to tell you that positive masculinity is still not going to appeal to these men. I think they're still going to remain hostile to it. And the second problem is that when the feminist movement tries to give too many concessions, tries to tell them that, okay, you can still be masculine, but you need to do this in like a positive way that also benefits women. We think they're going to be able to do this on their own terms. That's going to be very harmful because these men still are like very reluctant to join the feminist movement. And because of this, without any sort of force, we think we're not going to be able to change their mindsets at all. The very worst case on our side is that like at the very least, we still get like tell these men like what the feminist movement wants. They understand that we're not going to settle for less and like they can't just like join if they aren't going to like be able to join like if they don't want to like actually like commit themselves to like abolishing gender roles, even if this happens in a slow way. We tell you that like what can you take away from this? We tell you that the feminist movement actually needs to prioritize women's rights and actually gain larger acceptance. I think the only way to genuinely achieve this is to question and dismantle gender roles. What is the very best case on side proposition? I think the best that you can hope for on their side is that men still continue to follow their gender roles because that's still accepted on their side, but they just do this in a kinder and a subtler way. I think they're still going to continue to dominate in like certain industries, and they're still going to continue to be the breadwinners. And rather, this disparity is still going to be entrenched. And in fact, we think that this kind of feminism is still possibly going to prop up masculinity by celebrating these men for behaving in a way that is like traditionally like feminine and by doing like traditionally feminine things. Having said that, I'll take that POI.
Okay, so isn't the only reason feminists want to reach more rights in the end reach equality for both genders and parties?
Yes, that is true. And the only way we can do this, we've been telling you time and time again, is by dismantling gender roles. Because by the fact that your side still promotes positive masculinity, I think this does not go far enough. I think that you're still allowing men to adopt and like to keep the entrenched values that they've had for like hundreds of years, and that this is still going to be like bad in the long run. And like our side might have a harder journey, but we think it's one that's necessary to take in the long run. Having said that, like a little bit on the net harms and benefits that you get on side proposition, and I'll be talking about this in my substantive as well. They told you that men on their side are able to advocate to support feminists, and this was brought up in second. But we say that this is problematic. This is pretty telling of how much they value men's voices. And they value them, like it's good to value men's voices, but the problem occurs when they value these voices and these opinions far more than women who have been like disenfranchised, that the feminist movement is only going to be credible if men in influential positions are the ones facilitating dialogue. This is bad, but how would we go about this on our side, and why is it better? We think that rather than relying on men in these influential positions to like speak for us, we think we're going to take more time and put more effort to like promoting women in those industries, promoting women who actually have a voice and to speak out and like to actually like allow them to abolish gender roles and to promote the feminist movement in a way that aligns with like what women need the most. Having said that, I'll be moving on to my positive case, and how putting the priority on deconstructing gender roles actually strengthens the feminist movement and its sustainability. We tell you that by diverting too much attention to positive masculinity, society is going to prove again and again that men should be the focus, and that feminists still need to be the ones who pave a convenient path for men to change, and like we need to cater to them. Why is this so? 3 things. Firstly, we think that like on our side, it's the only side that'll be more assertive and clear regarding their goals. We think that while supporting positive masculinity can be framed as a means to like reduce toxic behavior among men, we think that the goal of the feminist movement is still to prioritize holding these individuals accountable for their actions, rather than just promoting a new ideal the moment that one doesn't work or we seem to have hit like a dead end. We tell you that in the end, positive masculinity is just a mindset, and it's a mindset that each man could interpret in a different way. So why is this ambiguity actually bad? We tell you that the feminist movement isn't monolithic. That in different cultures, the patriarchy holds a different extent of power. So what would happen here on side proposition is that in trying to preserve men's comfort, the feminist movement will continue to be cornered, they'll continue to be throttled, and patriarchal norms will continue to hold sway. How does it look like? Let me just give an example. We think that this clashes with second opposition's argument about traditional societies. I think that change is unlikely to happen because in traditional patriarchal societies, when you still try to listen to men as much as you listen to women, you end up undervaluing women. And even if change is going to happen, which is unlikely, I think that it's going to happen on men's terms and still going to serve to benefit them, even if it seems like they're helping women on a superficial level. We think this leads to regression of the feminist movement. It replicates the existing power dynamics that favors the voices of more privileged men while marginalizing women who are already at the fringes. So what is the positive comparison on our side? Sure, we accept the fact that we might get some alienation from men, but we're willing to trade this off with the fact that we get more dedicated members. We get men who truly believe in the ideas of the feminist movement, and these men are going to be far more effective, and they're actually going to vouch for women's rights more. For all these reasons, never been prouder to oppose.
Who does this? And esteemed opponents and my debate partners. Today, I will be first redefining the gender roles and toxic. I will first be comparing what the definition of gender role and toxic masculinity is. Second of all, I'll do some rebutting, and then lastly, I'll compare the worlds with prioritizing positive masculinity with abolishing gender roles, and then later on, I will also be talking about how. This is the three things I'm going to do. Okay, first of all, let's compare the gender roles and toxic masculinity. First, gender roles. Gender roles are, as everyone has said before, they are societal expectations and norms that dictate how individuals should behave based on their gender. And these roles often are by things like cultural, social, and historical contexts. And then second of all, toxic masculinity emphasizes traits where in men, which include things like aggression, dominance, emotional repression, which includes things like you should be strong and men should not cry, and also the devaluation of traits perceived as a feminine person. Okay, now what's the comparison between these two things? Gender roles are actually in a much broader spectrum of societal expectations, while toxic masculinity specifically talks about the harmful subset of masculinity norms that can be damaging to both men and women. Okay, now let's move on. So now on the opposition side, they talked about how the gender roles will actually be influencing was the root cause of toxic masculinity, and that by addressing this, it will be able to remove the toxic masculinity and also be helping with the feminist movement. However, we believe that this is actually false. First of all, toxic masculinity actually promotes certain traits. For example, as I said before, emotional suppression as ideals of how a man should behave. And then these ideals actually can create a rigid gender role that dictates not only how men should act, but also how women should respond or engage with the man who's acting this way. For instance, when a man is encouraged to reject the vulnerability and also the emotional expression, it reinforces the ideas such as women are weak, and that this will actually be further it's further entrenching the stereotype that men must be tough and unyielding, and that this would actually influence even more with the gender roles. So by removing toxic masculinity, we're able to remove things like this a lot more. Yes, what's your POI?
Yeah, even if with positive masculinity under your side, you still reinforce the traditional gender roles by saying that certain traits belong to certain genders and say that empathy being exhibited by men is really exceptional. Please engage how you achieve equality when you undermine women on your side.
That's a great question, and I'll actually be answering this question later on in my speech. And yes, patience. First of all, second of all, um culture the expectations in the ex societal expectations acceptance of toxic masculinity actually leads to expectation that that people, like especially men, should fulfill the traditional roles such as being the breadwinner or the authority figure in the family, and that this actually reinforces that women are secondary to men in many aspects of life, and that is can be also negated in when we're trying to be solving toxic masculinity, where we're going to be prioritizing supporting the positive masculinity. Next, I'm going to be talking about how we're actually abolishing these gender roles actually would be helping the no with I will actually be rebutting the point about abolishing gender roles and how it will help with the feminist movement. First of all, it will be actually first of all, there will be actually be a large risk of invisibility. And actually by abolishing a lot of these gender roles, might actually be inadvertently actually be rendering the gender-based issues invisible. And that if the society moves towards a more gender-neutral perspective, things specific needs and inequality experienced by women now will not be adequately addressed by us because we're unable to see it. And what we think that is gender neutral, this clear line between the men roles and the women's roles will actually be blurred. And then the feminist movement has been fought for the recognition of women's rights and experiences. And without acknowledging the gender as a factor, there's a risk that there will be a new barrier that women face, and it will be even worse than before. Now that as now a lot of the movement and a lot of the time and effort that has been spent to fight for the feminist movement is now lost and has to be redone. Second of all, there'll be also a lot of backlash. First of all, when we're trying to abolish gender roles, we can actually provoke a backlash from individuals who feel threatened by the changes of the traditional norms, and that this backlash can actually reinforce the existing power structures and also lead to increased resistance against feminist ideas. Now, why are we saying that we are better? First of all, and why are we saying that by prioritizing these positive masculinity, it will be much better? First of all, there will be a direct reduction of gender-based harm, and the impact of this is that positive masculinity actually directly addresses and reshapes harmful male behaviors that is associated with the toxic masculinity. Now, this will reduce a lot of the violence, the discrimination, repression, which are immediate and visible issues that we see today. And now it's a comparison of this. By abolishing gender roles, it will be targeting the border abolishing target gender roles will actually just be targeting the border structures, but it doesn't address the specific behaviors like aggression and dominance in men, and that is something that is very important to us. While in the long term, it is harder also to change the ingrained behaviors without focusing on the healthier masculinity. And our impact is actually much larger, as by reducing the harmful behaviors, it has a direct impact on women's safety, quality of life, and also that which is both two things that are in the feminist movement, and that these changes can be measured and felt immediately, which allows the woman to have a better, safer community and healthier relationship, and that this is already really large, as are the main goal for us is to help with the feminist movement. And for all the reasons above, this is why we strongly support.
Panel, the stance that the government pursues today is ultimately flawed. The end goal of both sides today is very, very clear. And it is the idea that we're trying to achieve a society where both genders are able to actually they attempt to solve the problem without answering the root cause of sexism, which is gender roles. And before I continue today, let's answer some of the pressing issues that have been brought up throughout the entire opening half in the member of the government. Now, first of all, let's start with Prime Minister. Their main argument is basically that by going about this positive masculinity idea and this route, they'll be able to actually gain approval from men who who are feeling insecure because they feel like the feminist movement is going against their way of life. Now, this approach basically fundamentally just misunderstands the essence of feminism itself. Feminism is not against, it's not against men, is right. It's not seeking to like challenge the very systems that harm everyone. It actually tries to actually challenge the very system that harm everyone, including men itself. If there are insecure men who feel attacked by it, that shouldn't be the feminist movement's fault, right? It shouldn't be their movement that has to completely change their direction in order to appeal to these men, to be able to like gain support from these men. We don't really understand why all of a sudden they want to actually seek approval from men so that they can like and go about their entire ethos of feminism itself. By promoting positive masculinity, we risk reinforcing the idea that masculinity needs to be validated, and rather than recognizing that true equality actually lies in dismantling the rigid gender roles that confine both men and women. So basically, the entirety of PM's case about how, oh, we're going to be doing this and that in order to achieve support from men and from other race, from other people in order to gain support, so that like the feminist movement can continue, it's just completely rubbish, because by doing so, you're taking down the entire progress that feminism has already built up thus far, and therefore basically just ruins the entire progress of the movement in its entirety. Now let's move on to the deputy prime minister. Now this case is where this is where OG basically chose away the entire fundamentals of the entire case, and is why they've been like taken out of the debate. Number one, the deputy prime minister claims that gender roles is not the main cause of inequality, nor is it the main cause of toxic masculinity. Now, there are a few fundamental issues with this statement. And firstly, they don't at all elaborate about this statement after that, nor do they name another like cause of toxic masculinity, no mechanization, no characterization as to explain, oh, what therefore would be the main cause of toxic masculinity, what would therefore be the main cause of gender inequality. Now, we as side closing opposition will therefore tell you why gender roles is a very clear main cause of gender inequality, right? Number one, gender roles have historically enforced strict expectations of how men and women should behave, right? So for men, we already know this, traditional gender roles often dictate that they must be this and that, aggressive, dominant, whatever, right? However, the rigid framework basically creates an environment where men feel pressured to actually conform to these ideas, right? Which is basically the entire definition of toxic masculinity, right? Which is how we show you that gender roles have in itself led to toxic masculinity. Now, the deputy prime minister basically tells you that, oh, there are many relationships currently that have lived with gender roles, and and they're all fine. So, this is fine, right? We don't really understand that at all. The whole idea of the feminist movement is that, oh, women shouldn't be confined to like the stereotypes that gender roles have, right? That they shouldn't just be forced to work at home, clean, to cook, whatever. That this is the entire like idea that feminism should be going for, the idea that not only women but men as well can just do whatever they want to do, whoever they want to be, right? So the idea that they would just claim that gender roles are fine, they're fine with it, they're okay if it doesn't affect them, completely takes them out to this debate. Not only that, they don't really have any mechanization nor characterization, as I've already mentioned so far, to actually explain their entire case so far, which is why I believe that opening government has been taken out of today's debate. Now, what has opening opposition told you? They basically told you that, oh, redefining men's stereotypes doesn't really solve the root issue, which is something that we agree on very strongly. The opening side, however, was very, very messy when regards to the clash on whether gender roles is the main cause of gender inequality. So that now that this is out of the way, we can more clearly see the opening opposition's case. They don't really focus on the motion from the eyes of the main actor, which we'll be telling you is the feminist movement, right? Which I'll be bringing to the table later on. They don't really focus on like how their entire argument basically really like impacts the feminist movement itself. They basically just simply define the feminist movement, the ethos of it, and whatnot. But we as closing opposition will basically bring to you what like this actually impacts, the main impacts. Now, finally, we'll be moving on to the member of government. Now, all that they basically tell you is that, oh, toxic masculinity equals to bad, so positive masculinity will somehow just be good for everyone. Not a lot of characterization once again, and no mechanization there to actually really explain what that would mean. They have a very, very messy argument about how like removing gender roles will somehow make a society like a gender neutral and lose sight of like the issues that females face. And we completely argue that this is just completely not true. Number one, we say that by removing gender roles, it solves a large majority of the issues that female face, that feminism has been fighting for, which is the idea that, oh, they can do whatever they want, right? Which is something that we've already been mentioning so many times now. They say that it won't really member of government also says that it won't really address issues like dominance from men, but it's the whole idea of removing gender roles is that men no longer feel societally pressured to exude dominance, and women can therefore feel comfortable working and doing whatever they want, right? So we don't really understand the idea that, oh, somehow just because society is going to become like a gender neutral place, or somehow like we're going to lose sight of feminist issues and everything will go bad. So, and this was a vast majority of the case, which is why we don't really understand. We feel like the entire case so far is very, very fundamentally flawed. Finally, I'll be going to my one substantive as to explain to you how this entire case is seen through the eyes of the feminist movement, and why our side will be impacting this entire debate motion as the most in the entire debate. Number one, let's compare the two words for a moment. Proposition seems to not really understand what it means when they won't remove gender roles, right? We've seen this confusion so far in both the opening and the member of government. Now, it really means that people are going to continue seeing when we don't remove gender roles, it means that we're going to see people continuing to see women as nothing more than a housewife, somebody that cooks or cleans. The decision to choose to stroke their ego of men and undo all the progress that feminist movements have been trying to enforce so far, the ideas that women should be allowed to work and be a breadwinner, is what they want to do, right? So we don't really understand how they don't really see how removing gender roles will be like a number one priority in this motion today. Number two, promoting positive masculinity fundamentally like contradicts the ethos of feminism, right? Feminism is rooted in the pursuit of equality and this dismantling of patriarchal structures, right? Which means that it is not the responsibility of the feminist movement to cater to the needs or validation of men, right? By focusing on positive masculinity, no, thank you. The time is out, we risk diverting attention away from core feminist goals of empowerment and equality for women and marginalized genders. Now, finally, feminism should not be tasked with reshaping masculinity to make men feel more comfortable. This is one thing that panel you must be able to really understand, which is the idea that by doing so, they're basically losing entire track and vision of the feminist movement as a whole. And therefore, I'm very, very proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
So to begin with, I would like to restate that our burden is to prove that voting for positive masculinity have the most positive impact on feminist movements. So I will start with my rebuttals, moving on to my clash, and then summarizing and comparing the entire debate. So to begin with rebuttals, our opponents have stated that abolishing gender roles is the only way to solve the main issue. By just simply moving to positive masculinity, the main issue is still there. However, we would like to state that completely abolishing gender roles from the get-go is overly idealistic and is too big of a step. It will likely face backlash and it will actually slow down the feminine movement. And therefore, that is why if we push for positive masculinity, it allows the feminist movement to be more widely accepted and more impactful and make the end goal, which is abolishing gender roles, easier. So we would like to again state that we are not pushing for by simply prioritizing positive masculinity, we are not completely throwing the abolishment of gender roles out of the window. We are simply prioritizing positive masculinity. We are not abandoning gender roles, basically. So our opponents have also stated that gender roles are equal to toxic masculinity, but again, completely abandoning gender roles from the get-go is very slow and very extreme. And as my partner has stated, by simply pushing for a positive masculinity, it is taking one step at a time, and that we would get, and in the end, we would get the benefit of both sides of the world. So, our opponents have also stated that by simply prioritizing positive masculinity, we are actually making the men look good. We are basically making the men look good, and that is not what the feminine movement want. We agree, this is not what the feminine movement want. However, this is a necessary step in order for people to recognize and for people to feel more included in the feminine movement and for people to more support this feminine movement in order to achieve the end goal of abandoning gender roles. And therefore, I move on to the clash, which is gender equality. The opening government have stated that pushing for positive masculinity can lead to inclusivity, empathy. However, they fail to their impact is not great enough compared to ours. Please, with your POI.
How can you hold abolishing gender roles as your end goal and then say it's extreme and then say you're going to do it in a slower and a better way? Please make your stance clear.
I'm sorry, you may have misinterpreted my sentence. I'm saying that abolishing gender roles is indeed the end goal. But however, just by simply going this big step from feminine movement and immediately to abolishing gender roles is a huge step and could be overly idealistic. And that's why we need this small step of prioritizing positive masculinity, which means that people will feel more included. This will be also faster to roll out, and therefore that since we have the people on the correct step, we have everyone around us, it will be much easier to move to abolishing gender roles than from immediately going from zero to abolishing everything that we know from tradition. And the opening opposition have stated that gender roles equals to toxic masculinity. However, as we have stated earlier, it is too big of a step, it is too idealistic, and therefore it is extremely hard and unrealistic to achieve from the get-go. And therefore, that is why we think that the closing government has the main argument, as because we have stated that positive masculinity is just a step. Prioritizing it is one step at a time and it allows benefits from both sides of the road. First, we would get inclusivity and empathy from man and from the woman around us. That's one of the benefits. And the other one is that in the end, it would be much easier to abolish gender roles, and therefore we would get the benefit from both sides of the road and completely create a final equal world. And the exclusiveness of us prioritizing positive masculinity is that it is super fast to set up. Rather than completely abolishing gender roles, which will probably take a long time as you have to convince everyone, just by simply moving to positive masculinity and then moving to abolishing gender roles would be a lot faster to establish and a lot faster to win people's hearts. And not just that, another exclusive benefit for us is that it is both good for both cultural and traditional equality. Talking about traditional, gender roles have been a long time ago. From the start of the ancient civilization, it has always been with us, and it will be a lot harder for us. And therefore, pushing for this one step at a time would be good for both cultural and traditional equality. And moving on, we think that we have mainly three benefits that we want to emphasize. The first is achievability, the second is inclusivity, and the third is broader social acceptance. To begin with, positive masculinity is easier to implement and thus is more likely to create real-world change in a considerable manner, in a relative good time. And moving on, inclusivity allows men to become allies within feminism and making the movement stronger and making the movement easier to achieve its end goal. And not just that, moving on to broader social acceptance, positive masculinity respects cultural context where gender roles are still valued, ensuring that feminist goals can be embraced globally rather than simply respected in a small area. And therefore, in the end, this one step at a time would lead to a much easier push for the end goal, and that pushing and prioritizing positive masculinity over abolishing gender roles could lead to more inclusivity and is basically two birds with one stone, as you get both benefits from both sides of the road, and we get exclusive benefits such as faster to set up and good for cultural and traditional equality. And therefore, that is why we think that prioritizing positive masculinity has a lot more positive impacts on the feminine movement than immediately moving for a abolishment of the gender roles. And therefore, we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
When you pit the chains of conformity against the freedom of individuality, no one is going to tell you that they want to shape themselves to an ideal that doesn't represent themselves truly. I'm going to go into just what the opening half has said and my conclusion out of it, and why our extension made by my member is better. It takes down OG's case as well as why our entire op bench just beats out Gov bench. All right, firstly, what does OG tell you? They claim that a lack of focus on positive masculinity alienates men who resonate with this traditional ideal. But by enforcing the idea that there are expectations of what makes a man is going to help, the whole reason why there are men who resonate so much with this idea in the first place is because they grew up in an environment that tells them that you are not a man if you don't do this, implying that you're not good enough if you do not resonate with or relate to these expectations. Sure, there is no denying that there are men out there who genuinely relates to this traditional idea, but it's more likely going to help a larger demographic of men who are oftentimes beat down for not wanting to lead, beat down for not being tough, or beat down for showing emotions. If we break down the conformity that restricts these men to follow this ideal in the first place, it's going to help much more. And their whole case is basically built on wanting to appeal and include these men into the movement. And we say that if inclusivity is what you're really looking for, then there are far better ways to do it, like allowing men to be their own individual person without conforming to a traditional idea and supporting the idea of individuality rather than conformity, right? And what OO does in response? OO responds to OG by getting into how gender roles are the root cause to these specific gender traits in the first place, both positive and toxic masculinity. So to enforce positive masculinity is to just rename and rebrand the look of an already existing chain of conformity. But they also tell us briefly in the response why masculinity shouldn't be a focus, and then dives into more about why true equality is so much better, and a focus on it is better than the former, which draws the conclusion that OO basically takes down OG's case in the opening half. But what does CG tell us in the closing? They go on about how they want to remove the toxic traits of masculinity and about how men should be acting and how women should be responding, even though this clearly implies that there is an expectation placed on people of certain genders from society. They say that we're rendering the gender issue invisible by breaking down gender roles, even though the reason why the gender issue is such a big deal in the first place is because of these gender roles. You say it undermines women's rights, even though the whole point of women having rights through the movement is to be equal to men in society. By bringing back these gender conformities, you're basically just reinforcing the fact that there's something that separates women and men, and this something is probably more than likely going to lead to maintaining that lack of equal opportunity and basic equality in society. Breaking down the gender roles is not only allowing women to see this new perspective as equal to men, but to also allow both men and women to grow individually without being forced or without being pressured into conforming to a societal expectation, right? They also think that it will offend traditional individuals, even though that's the whole point, because traditional gender values instilled by these traditional individuals are harmful to people and finding their own identities and being comfortable in their own skin. Abolishing gender roles, they also mentioned, is too idealistic. But let me just ask you this. Maintaining the same ideals that have been what the feminist movement has been fighting for decades is the next great step to take. What government is doing here, especially in CG, is quoting garbage and gold and proposing it as the next big invention. You even said yourself that you're making men look good and comfortable in their conformities instead of getting to the root cause that says that the idea that separates women and men so clearly for decades is a bad idea. There are so many more small steps that you can take other than reinforcing the chains that have beat down both men and women for so long. Now, moving on, I would like to weigh a bit on what my member has said. He has clearly analyzed and broken down for you clearly exactly why an emphasis on positive masculinity is bad. He explained basically in full detail why the existence of the idea in the first place in the feminist movement goes against the ethos and the principle of the movement. Government side has basically spent this entire debate trying to convince us that a lack of individuality in our day and age in both men and women, painted in a more positive light and proposed to society, is supposed to help promote gender equality. I think we have made it very clear on our side not only how our priorities should be placed on the breakdown of the root problem of gender roles, but also that keeping and maintaining the same chains that have plagued our society and people of both genders in society is a terrible idea that shouldn't even be a part of the movement that is supposedly supposed to strive for freedom of identity and equality regardless of gender. He also tells you that the existence of this idea and of gender traits basically just hinders the progress made by the movement towards its true equality goal, which is supposed to be the goal that we're all striving for towards at the end of the day. And this leads on to also why our extension beats our OO's case. There is one side to the ultimate goal for true equality, which OO took a focus on improving why it is better than a shift of focus to masculinity. We tell you, not only is prioritizing this gender roles area more than positive masculinity a better action to take, but we also tell you that placing any emphasis on masculinity and giving it any attention in the first place is just a plain horrible idea. OO and OG goes in a bit of a circle basically on why each one takes a priority, because they went on in their cases about why the focus on each side is better, right? But we come in as CO and we break this deadlock by simply proving why Gov's side is just simply bad, and that masculinity shouldn't even be on a priority list in the first place, let alone talked about within the movement. My member has told you that the idea of positive masculinity is contradictory to the idea of the feminist movement in the first place. Not only that, but we also go both into why the masculinity idea and this idea of what a man should be like is supposed to be abolished, and why the sole and only focus of the movement and the only goal of the movement is true equality in identity, which goes into the clash as well of conformity versus individuality, which we believe always that individuality takes the edge. And we also tell you that basically not only are we competing on which side is better, but we're telling you not only is one side better, but the other one is worse than you think. And with all that, we're proud to oppose.